Alright, there she is, the 4G63. First thing to know is this is my first time rebuilding an engine, so I use this as a guide. I'm not a master tech, but I do this myself. If it runs, it runs. If it blows up, probably gonna do it again. So the first thing I'm gonna do is delete these OEM balance shafts. Alright, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean the threads for the head gasket. This is a chaser I'm gonna use, M11 times 1.25. Got some cutting oil. So you want to go back and forth. Low key, it's fighting back, so it's kind of scary. Alright, so I ended up chasing all the threads, and I'm not gonna lie, they go in pretty smooth. I didn't record all of them. I posted probably like 2 or 3 and some of the debris, but yeah, it goes in by hand. It goes in pretty smooth all the way. The next thing I'm gonna do after cleaning the tabs, I'm gonna try to measure my piston to wall clearance. That's just the clearance between the piston and the walls. To do that, I just need to measure the piston at a certain spot. I already marked it, should be right there, right there. So I'm gonna measure that with the outside caliper, and then I'm gonna set that measurement to the bore gauge, zero it out, and then insert that in the piston walls, and it should give me the measurement for the piston to wall clearance. And it's my first time using it, so I'll show you guys how I do it. Alright, so on here it says piston to wall clearance. Let it focus. The piston diameter must be measured at a gauge point, which is measured from the bottom of the oil ring. So the first 2 rings are compression and the last one is oil. So that means I start the measurement from the bottom of that, and then wherever it lands, I'm going to shoot for 1 inch and 1/100 of an inch, I believe. But I'll show you how I do it. So I got the Pittsburgh caliper, nothing fancy. I'm going to go to 1 inch and 1/100. Right there, let me lock in place. And I already had done this, so I already marked it right down the caliper. As you could see, it says under the oil ring. That's the oil ring. So we're gonna measure it from here and here with the outside mic. So to read the mic, there's a 3 inch, that's the first number, and then it has the number 3 right there, that's 3.3, and then each of those small little lines are a quarter each, so that's 50, and then you got the 10, 62 lines up to the dash right here. Alright, so that's the measurement of the first piston. I'm gonna set my dial bore gauge to that. Alright, so I want to adjust the dial bore gauge just a bit to zero it out on the farthest point. Looks like right there it touches the 0. It's the lowest point. So we zero it out. And that's piston 1. Piston 1's gonna go in this one, so that this will tell us the clearance. Clearance looks like it's gonna be in between, that looks like about 3.5 thousandths. Yeah, 3.5 thousandths of an inch. So I'm gonna say 3.5 overall piston wall clearance on this one, on first cylinder, and then I'm gonna just double check the rest to make sure. So this one's not passing the 300 thousandths of an inch. So it's not like below 300 thousandths of an inch, but it's just slightly over. So I'd say it's good as long as not under. Alright, so this one looks to be 3.5 thousandths of an inch. 3.5 thousandths. So the machine shop sets the piston to wall clearance. They measure the pistons and then they set the piston to wall clearance. I'm just double checking it to not be completely off, if that makes sense. Also, before checking it, you want to clean the wall with brake cleaner. Make sure it's not, doesn't throw off the measurement. This one 3.5. 3.5 thousandths. 3.5 should be fine. Yeah, so piston wall looks good for all 4 cylinders. I'm gonna send it. It looks like you got some flash rust. I'm gonna try green scuff pad and brake cleaner to clean it out. Let's see. Alright, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna chase down the threads on the mains. I don't have a thread chaser for that one, so I'm just gonna use a regular tap. This one's M10 1.25. This one's 11 M11 0.125. Hopefully this tap doesn't mess up the threads. Actually, I got a chaser low-key. So there's the tap, and I have a chaser for that one, like I said. I just finished all of them. So basically the threads I feel like cleaned up pretty good. Alright, so the next thing is I'm going to input the ARP main bolts. The part with the Allen key goes up. The one that doesn't goes down. You don't need lube on the bottom part that goes into the block. So I'm going to put all of them in, and then I'm going to torque the cover with no bearings. I'm going to just torque it to spec and see if it has any out of round from using the ARP studs. So it says to put them in hand tight. I'm going to just put them in hand tight, and then I'm going to give it a quick turn with the Allen key. Since I feel like everybody's hand tie is a little bit different. Alright, so I ended up throwing on the ARP studs with the fastener lube. The bolts all torqued down. There's no bearing shells, and I'm gonna check for out of roundness. You should hit the 0 every time if it's even. You could see a 0 right there. Let me try to get this one. 0. Alright, so I'm removing the bolts from the ARP studs after torquing them down and checking if it had warpage from using ARP studs. And right now I took off this one and it came out with the whole bolt, and I don't think that's a good sign. It says hand tight, that's the thing. I can't tell which one's all hand tight. Alright, this one too, look. See how the stud itself is moving? That's not a good sign. It's gonna come out with the stud. Yeah, I don't think that's supposed to do that, so I'm pretty sure I want them to stay like that. Alright, so this stud, and this last one came out with it. I'm gonna just hand tighten them, and then I'm gonna give them a little bit more with the Allen key. And hopefully next time I remove them, it's gonna prevent it from coming up with the bolt. If not, I gotta figure out why, because I'm pretty sure it shouldn't do that. Alright, so I'm gonna check my clearance on the mains. I went with ACL bearings. That's the mains, and then this should be the big end on the connecting rods. Alright, so the first thing I did is I checked if I saw anything that looked a little off. To me, they all looked fine. So these are the ACL race bearings. So this one, check it out, has no grooves on top. So this one is going to be the ones that go inside the rails. And then you see this one, you see how it has that line right here? This one's going to be the top one that matches with this for the oil on the block. So these are basically the top ones, because when the engine's flipped over, this would be considered the top, and then these are the bottom ones. So these are all the top ones, bottom ones. I'm gonna install them. Before installing them, I'm gonna use just a lint-free rag, clean them with brake cleaner, and then I'll install them, and then I'm gonna try to measure my clearance for the mains. So I'll put it on a tripod. Alright, so this is my first time ever putting a bearing in. And the first thing I want to do is, if you could see it, camera's kind of blocking it. Inside the shell right here, it has a groove. It has a groove like that on the bearing, and I want to put that first in, and then I just want to push in the rest. When I push it in, I want to push this in and then push it down at the same time, if that makes sense. Just like that. And then it should be even in between both. See, that looks good. And I'm gonna do the rest. Or let me show you that groove that I was talking about. So as you can see right here, this is the groove where you want to start first, and then you want to push it in from this way, that way, and then push it down at the same time. Should look like that. Alright, so I'm gonna put the rest of the bearings in. I already cleaned the bearings just a second ago, so I'm gonna just clean these real quick. And these ones, same thing. You have this little piece that's called the tang. You want to input that first. So you want to start with the tang, and then you just want to push it forward. But you want to try to like push forward and then down at the same time, if that makes sense. Because if you just push it down, you're gonna scrape it against the edge right here, and you don't want to do that. And then make sure they're flush. Alright, now I didn't mention this before, but the 4G63s, they go in one way only. You can see the arrow right here that goes towards the front, towards the crank, where the crank bolt is and the timing. I'm going to put assembly lube on the washer and on the bowl itself and on the threads, so all 3 spots. I already did that, so I'm going to just put them back and then torque them down. Alright, so I'm gonna torque them down 60 foot-pounds. I'm gonna do 20, 40, and then 60, and then there's a sequence. 40. Alright, crank it up to 60. Alright, so the crank's all on 60 foot-pounds with the bearings in. And to check my bearing clearance, I'm gonna use the dial bore gauge again. And all I gotta do is measure the crank with some calipers, set my dial bore gauge with that, and then slide it in here and check the reading for what's the clearance in between the crank and the bearing for the mains. Alright, so after measuring the crank, that's the measurements 1 through 5. And as you can see, they were pretty close from before. So I'm gonna just grab 2.2435 since that's the most common one. Alright, as you could see, it hits the 0, the smallest point. So we zeroed out the dial bore gauge. Alright, so rocking it back and forth, you could see looks like it's at 3/1000ths of an inch clearance for oil. Oh, look, that one slightly under, no? That one looks like at 2.5 thousandths. This one about 2.5, in between 2.5 and 3/1000ths of an inch. So I'm gonna take it off the stand and measure the other two. 2.5, and check the last one inside. This one's 2.5. This one's in between 2.5 and 3.0, so should be good. I'll write them down just to remember, but the oil clearance for the mains should be good like that. Alright, so that's the clearance for the mains. First one's 3.0, 2.5, 2.7, 2.5, 2.5. So they're all within spec. Spec should be, I'll pull the sheet right here, but it should be like minimum 1.2 to 1.5, and the maximum would be 3.0 for some reason. This one's giving me 3.0, but I mean, they're all within clearance. It could be I measured something wrong, but then again, I mean, these are other in spec, so they're all within spec. We're gonna send it that way. All right, so the connecting rods. Got the Turbo Tough I-beam rods. Here's one up the package. So they do have the ARP 2000 studs or bolts. So at first I was confused on what was the torque spec and the stretch for the bolt. So I ended up calling Manly real quick, told them the part number, and then they actually told me that it's supposed to be this one, 42351. And it's weird, or I mean, it kind of makes sense, but I didn't see like Mitsubishi on here or Evo. I just saw Chevy, Ford. But when you look at it, I guess, so they know that's a part number, that's the bolt, and then it's an ARP 2000. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna check my clearance, my oil clearance for the big ends. All right, so everything's clean. Make sure to use torque lube on the threads. All these bearings look the same, so I don't think there's a special one like the mains. So I'm gonna just put them in. Put the tang in first, and then push forward and down. Just like that. Tang right here, tang right here. So this goes in this way. That's how you know the cap is straight too. So I just got the regular ARP 2000s. So when you look right here, oh, smacked them. All right. So when you look right here, ARP 2000, it says torque value should be 55 to 60, and then for some reason it says recommended with ARP lube, and right here it says final assembly 60, 55 to 65. So I'm gonna just do 60 both times, and then this is the amount of stretch we want on the gauge. So we're gonna torque it down, and we're also gonna use this ARP stretch gauge to check how much the bolt stretches. So right now I have the bolt on there hand tight. I'm gonna zero out the gauge. So it's zeroed out right there. I'm gonna tighten the thimble or whatever you call it. Alright, so I'm gonna torque it down and then we'll see the stretch. Alright, so after torquing it, stretch looks to be a little on top of the 5. So that's 5 thousandths point something, but we want to be at 5.58 through 6.2. So by the looks of it, I'm sure I'm gonna probably give it like an extra 2 foot-pounds of torque on the next one, and I'm gonna see how that looks. But I think that should be fine either way if I do 60. Alright, so I was checking the clearance for the rods. This dial bore gauge is too big to fit in between the rods. So what I'm gonna do, can't check it unless I get another dial bore gauge, but I don't have time. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just use plastic gauge on these. But I checked the stretch for the bolt and the stretch is fine. So technically, I mean, I know the bolt's clamping on right, but I still need to check the clearance, so I'm gonna just use plastic gauge for that. Alright, so I got the scale out. Next thing I'm gonna do is try to balance the pistons. Alright, so next thing is I'm gonna file down the top and the bottom compression ring. The oil ones we don't need to do anything to. I have the wheel right here. And after checking out the sheet, I'm gonna do the board times 0.005 for the top and the bottom ring. So when you do that, it gives you 19 thousandths of an inch. I'm gonna insert it and check it a couple times. I don't even know how to use this file gauge. I just know I gotta push against it or pull against it this way. Alright, so I set the ring gap, the top rings, to 19,000. I recommend adding paint so you know which side you're grinding, because at first I kept forgetting, so the paint helps on all 4. Let me pull up 19 thousandths. So 19. Slides. 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 So all 4 are 19 thousandths. Let me put the second rings on there. And also when you're gonna put these in, yeah, you push them in forward and then rotate it, and then you want to make sure it's even, so just use a piston and then square it out. Let me check that gap. 20 slides. So I should have done 22 on all of them. Should be 22 on all of them. 22, 22, 22. So all 8 rings are filed down to spec, or I ended up doing 19 and then I put 20, but I'm gonna rewrite it 22. And then the oil control rings, you don't need to gap those. Those should be like perfectly like 99% of the time. Alright, so after a couple tries, kind of hit it with the screwdriver a bit, but it should be fine. You want to lube it up. Oh yeah, so I ended up going with red line assembly lube. Alright, so the first one's on. I'm gonna install all the wrist pins and the piston and the connecting rods together, and then I'll work on the rings. Alright, made a Mickey Mouse holder out of the Manly connecting rod box to hold it in place. So top compression ring be right here. The oil expander will be here to here, and then the second compression ring will be right here. The bottom oil ring looks to be like about right here, and the other one will be over here. Alright, so the oil rings, this is going to be the top one, the shiny one. This one has no mark whether it's going to be up or down. And then this is the second compression ring. If you look at this side, other side, right here where my finger's at, it has a little black dot, so that means that one needs to face up. So this one we want it to go like that. So the first one's gonna go all the way to the bottom. And then this is the oil expander. So I'll just put the expander right here. Alright, so I'm gonna take the girdle off to finally clean everything, and then assemble everything and torque it to spec. Should be ready after I clean it. Alright, so after I gave ARP a call, asked them if they meant hand tight with an Allen key or hand tight just the stud itself. And he said to just do the stud itself hand tight, and then he said they're not supposed to bottom out. You just do hand tight just the stud. And then I also told him about when I broke loose the bolts, if it was normal for the stud to come with it, and he said that's fine, and that means that the threads are clean themselves on the block. But I told him it was a couple, and he said yeah, that should be normal and that's fine. So looks like we should be good, I guess. Alright, so everything's assembled, the bare block. I'm gonna clean it one more time before the final installation. And then this is everything. Everything's getting cleaned, brake clean, compressor. I have a mess in my room. I'm gonna use the nylon brushes to clean the engine block, lint-free towels, brake cleaner, and then I'm gonna assemble everything again one final time. Alright, so I cleaned the whole block. What I'm gonna do is torque down the oil squirters. I already cleaned them as well, brake cleaner, air compressor, and these get torqued down to 24 foot-pounds, all four. I already put them in, I'm just gonna torque them down. 23.5, 24. Next is gonna be the bearings on the mains. Alright, next thing I'm going to do is clean the bearings again. I just cleaned them, put them in. I'm going to install the crank. Crank is already cleaned. And then install the studs, and then we'll go on from there. Gotta be careful. Alright, next thing I'm gonna do is install the ARP studs. Alright, the next thing is going to be the thrust washers. You want these little things to face towards the crankshaft, and the flat side is going to be against the block. I'm going to add some lube on the crankshaft side. Alright, it's lubed up. Just going to slide this one in. Should have done it before with out the studs, but looks like it's sliding in fine. Alright, cool. First one's in. Push the crank the other way. There we go. Lube is on, and I gotta make sure to push it this way, flat side against the block. Cool, there we go. Alright, thrust washers are in. Alright, I'm gonna install the bearings again. I already cleaned it with air compressor, brake cleaner. Alright, I'm gonna install the ARP washers and the nut. This one goes over. Alright, so camera died. So I ended up torquing it in sequence to spec. Rotates pretty smooth. So next thing I was going to do is, since I couldn't check the clearance with the bore gauge, I'm going to just install them, and then I'm going to check with a plastic gauge. Alright, so I'm going to put the piston in. I'm going to double check that all the rings are in the right order. You can see where I kind of nicked it right there, getting the ring on. I mean, we're gonna send it, because honestly it's my first time. The pliers didn't end up working. They only worked for the first ring, and the second ring didn't want to go in, like it was thinner or something. I don't know, the pliers didn't work. So I'm gonna double check that. Piston says front, so all of them going like that, front, and then the tang's facing right there. The tang is gonna be facing the back of the engine, like that. All four. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I was gonna check the crank end play. Got this from Amazon, didn't work, not even once. It literally broke when I was putting it on. Gauge doesn't go up. So I couldn't check, but I asked the homie, he said it should be fine, so I'm gonna send it like that. Top oil ring, second oil ring, lower, upper oil control, and then right here is the oil control. Alright, so I'm gonna check a plastic gauge. First time using it. This side has a tang, this side's flat. So that means it goes in like that. I had already checked the stretch of the ARP bolts, so I'm gonna check after I torque them down. Alright, so that's plastic gauge stretch after removing it. I'd say that looks about 2/1000. To make it slide, I'm gonna add some engine oil on the skirt. Alright, and remember, front of the piston says front towards the timing. Alright, so let me know if I was supposed to put assembly lube under on the crank, because I'm pushing the connecting rod up, so I kind of can't do this. I cleaned it, added lube on the bearing of course, but I can't add lube on the other side. And then you gotta make sure you line up the tangs. This is gonna be 40 and then 60. Sheesh. So you just want to lay down there flat. You just want to push it. I'm gonna try to check the stretch gauge with this one and see what it reads. I forgot to do it on this first one. Alright, so I zeroed it out, and then I'll check the stretch. Alright, So I zeroed out the stretch gauge. Let it focus. Right there you could see it says it's over the 5.5. ARP 2000s, stretch 5.8 to 6.2, 60 foot-pounds. I feel like that's perfect. Take it out. So we got the 2 pistons in. Can't do it by hand, of course. Alright, so I'm finished putting on the rest, but I want to spin it real quick. That's the first 2. Alright, here's the engine fully assembled. Last clip was a couple months ago. Just ended up assembling the last 2 pistons, torqued them to spec. So use this as a guide since I don't even know if it's going to run. It might run, probably like 7 out of 10 it's going to run. If it runs, I'll be stoked. So the main things to consider when building your own: piston wall clearance, rod bearing clearance, main bearing clearance, crank end play. I couldn't check since the gauge broke. Torque everything to spec in order. And then I should have probably built a Honda before this, but since the Evo Blue decided to send it, and ended up grabbing more parts, manifold, new turbo, and we're gonna find out if it's gonna run.